Hello, everybody. Sil the DM here, and we're back with another session recap for the Frontier. Continuing on where we left off, the party was just about to make it towards a city. When along the way, Shay spotted an odd-colored patch of mushrooms off the side of the road and went to investigate. It seemed to be a ring, about 5 feet maybe in diameter, of just these mushrooms growing in sort of a perfect circle. And she investigated for a little bit and asked the party if they knew anything about it. And cut a few of the mushrooms and threw a rock in the center. Nothing seemed to happen, so after a bit of screwing around with the circle, they left, continuing their trip north towards the center of Karaendall, um, with the intent of delivering word to the Duchess of Stromhammer. So after about another hour or so of riding, they made it to the first of the 13 cities of Karaendall, which they didn't know the name of until they were about over halfway through the city. Getting through the gate was fine, and they continued down the main street, which would lead them to the northern gate. They saw a lot of sights within the city itself, large lake, some parks and wooded areas, a mine, a large open market, interacted with a small child who was out playing, uh, and Shay gave the kid like 15 gold or some nonsense. Like, way too much money for any child to have. And it was around that time that they learned the name of the city was Dorzun, which is the only like really dwarven city in the duchy outside of Mount Combal itself. This city is like 80% dwarf or some shit like that in the statistics. But they didn't stop or do any shopping or pick up any supplies or anything. They just interacted with that child, got the name of the city, and then left. They got to the other end of the city and out onto the road. Now that they're in Karaendall, they noticed the roads were quite different. Gravel roads that seemed to be extremely well maintained, ditches on either side, and the roads are large enough for a stagecoach and a half at least. So they're probably about 35, 40 feet wide, give or take, um, giving a lot of space for a traveling party to sort of fan out or take up as much or as little room as they want. And as they were traveling north, taking this very straight, very flat road across the extremely flat plains of Karaendall, they noticed occasionally just these random spurts of speed where they seemed to cover more ground than it felt like. And they weren't really getting the same exhaustion you would expect from hard travel on a horse over the course of a day. And some of the guards they had spoke to seemed to have implied that there was some sort of enchantment on the road. And not Nixandra, different video I recorded this morning. Vanya had asked one of the guards about fearing highwaymen or monsters on the road, and that seemed to get the guard laughing quite heartily, uh, as these roads, which the players' characters aren't really aware of, are basically the safest roads in the world. Not that things don't happen, but kinda. Karaendall, as a duchy, employs a rather impressive military force called the Riders of North. And Riders of North are sort of heavily equipped outriders who maintain the roads and ensure the enchantments still are functioning correctly. And they move out in various numbered squads, but basically all the roads are patrolled on an extremely tight schedule, and the schedule is changed relatively frequently, so that even if someone did attempt to memorize the pattern of the schedule and commit crime on the road intermittently with when the patrols are by, they're going to get caught very quickly. So yeah, the party traveled for about another 6.5-ish hours. It was getting nightfallish when they came upon a hostel, a two-story sort of hotel on the road, um, which again the guards at the city of Dorazun seem to apply it are like very strategically placed along the roads in between the points of where people would need to be, basically. Um, they put their horses, the ones acquired from Brigitte, into the stable next to a pair of horses that were already there. Shay took a little bit of time feeding and watering the horses and giving them a brush as everyone dismounted. And Vanya went inside to purchase their rooms for the night from the owner of this establishment, which I believe was named Gedrig, who was a heavy set but kind looking human, very clean. He gave them 2 rooms, Vanya getting one for herself and one for the rest of the party to share. In the tavern, there was a pair of dwarves drinking and jeering at a hobgoblin companion who was in armor with weapon shield, like full sort of get up. The dwarves looked like they were wearing armor, but were also seemed to be more relaxed than the hobgoblin, as well as a hooded elf and a very old-looking human off to one side of the room. Eventually, the rest of the players came into the tavern. Um, Emerald, upset that they were given a joint room with everyone else, paid for a separate room. They paid for meals, supper, and breakfast, um, and then took their seats and pulled some of the tables together. Um, Echo going up to the room to uh, do a little bit of changing, shift a little bit of their figure around, and get out of their armor to just sort of relax before rejoining the party. It was at this point that they noticed that the hobgoblin was just sort of like keeping like a careful eye on them, um, but it seemed to be looking more at Echo in particular. Um, at one point, Echo sort of called over to the Hobgoblin, and this started a long chain of roleplay conversations with the Hobgoblin being jeered by the dwarves and embarrassed, leaving the bar for a while, Echo going out and talking with him. You learn that the Hobgoblin's name was Hefir Dronfang. Um, and they talked for a little while and flirted a bit. Eventually, the pair of them returned and sat at the table with the party together, much to the delight of the dwarves, who Hiffy are sort of described as like adopted uncles. Sort of like not related but distant family. Um, and during all this, the elf who had been sitting with the old human had been taking a notice in the loud and boisterous party, and decided to go join them at the table. This, of course, being one of our players, Nhel's player, who had wanted to make a new character, uh, joined the party with Zane, their dark elf monk, which really seemed to put Hayfear on edge. Uh, though the hobgoblin didn't do anything brash or uncalled for or untoward. Um, the dark elf being around definitely seemed to make him nervous. And after a bit of time, Hayfear and Echo excused themselves to go somewhere more private. Um, the party continued to converse and chat, get to know each other a little bit better before eventually going to bed. They determined that Zane and the party were both heading towards the capital, um, and that Zane was going there to visit a, again, very distant, barely related via adoption relative. So no blood, but someone who has an interest in them and is related to the person who adopted them, one of their fathers. Um, so the party went to bed and sort of just enjoyed a good night's sleep in comfortable, serviceable beds. They woke up, had some showers, and prepared for the day before enjoying a hearty breakfast of thick back bacon, eggs, and bread with some cheese, provided by the uh, hotel, the hostel. Um, in particular, Gadrig's son, whose name the party never acquired, was responsible for cooking the supper the night before and breakfast. It was at this point that the party had met and begun to see some interaction between Zane and uh, the human that Zane was traveling with, a very old courier wearing fine courier outfit, like very, very well tailored and well maintained, who went by the name Edwin the Swift. Um, After a brief breakfast, very brief, and a bit of tea, Edwin and Zane set out a bit earlier than the rest of the party, as Echo wanted to go and say goodbye to Hayfair, who was dealing with the drunken dwarves who didn't make their way back to their beds last night and just got drunk and passed it at their table and were still drinking, um, which seemed to exasperate the young hobgoblin who was supposed to be like escorting them on their trip around the cities, and they were supposed to be making progress today and get to the capital. Um, but that didn't seem to be in the cards at the moment. So Hefir spoke with Echo for a little bit, uh, as Echo explained that they were leaving, and the pair of them seemed to like to re-meet in the capital if that would be something that they could manage. Um, and it was at this point that the party took out, trying to catch up to uh, Zane and Edwin along their way, taking their horses. And they did eventually get rather close, and once there, Vaughn decided to pull a bit of a prank and send a message to Zane, um, utilizing a little bit of a joke from the night before, when the party had discovered that Zane's leg was a prosthetic. And it was about that time that Zane got hit in the head with a sledgehammer. And there was this little buzzing noise, which Shay recognized as a sound that she had heard when she was by the ring of mushrooms the day before. Recognizing the sledgehammer as her own, it appeared that Shay must have disturbed some sort of quickling, or it was what I call them in my settings, fastling. Um, just because it's just what I've always called them. I don't know why I call them fastlings instead of quicklings. I really don't know, but it's just in my notes ever since I'd made this setting back in 2009 or 2000 and, oh Jesus, the setting was made in 2005. September 2005 was when I first started like actively writing for this setting, albeit the setting existed before that, but that was when I like sat down and like started writing world building notes. Before then, it was just this was always just where I ran my stories, and I tried to keep things sort of cohesive. Um, yeah, it's been a long time. But apparently, Shay had almost hit maybe or interrupted the sleep of this fastling, who was within that sort of fairy ring, as people of Earth would call that sort of mushroom circle. We would call it a fairy ring. I wouldn't say they're quite common, but they're not uncommon in very certain places in the world. Um, and the thing had managed to steal the sledgehammer off of Shay's back without anybody noticing. And it seemed to have been stalking them for a chance to pull a little bit of mischief in retaliation. And it took off with the hammer. But it gave them time to unite the two traveling parties who journeyed the rest of the way making just casual small talk, occasionally seeing a squadron of Riders of North go by with their Karaendallish colors, their heavy armor, magical arms and weapons and armors, massive horses, nearly twice the size of their horses, huge, just huge steeds, and just awesome magical armor that all sort of glistens in the morning light. And they rode the day, stopping for a bit of lunch along the way and to feed and water their horses. Eventually making it to the first hill they've seen, as the sort of plains of Karaendall are like in the southern area of the duchy are all extremely flat. Um, there's a few hills around Mount Combal, but like for the most part, this part of the duchy is just extremely flat. Um, and they finally got to like a hill, which upon cresting it, it revealed to them this brilliant city, expanding in very wide, different ways. A large forest with this massive tree, waterfalls pouring down, large lakes glistening in the orange light of twilight, massive buildings of marble and crystal and stone in various massive shapes with these huge spires that seem to be ringed in gold. And at the very center of all of this, a crystal tower, with this sort of red or blue wooden top, circular top to the tower, upon which there is just this titanic flag, with the symbol of Karaendall sort of fluttering on it. Um, and it was at this point that Edwin, the old human who'd been traveling with them and conversing with them, welcomed them all to uh, Damarand, the city of dreams. Uh, and that's where we ended the session. So hopefully we'll find a way to have our good friend Zane stick around, and hopefully the players have fun in a new capital city, in a whole new duchy where none of them had ever been before. And it's going to be a bit different. The Amovan swamplands are, let's just say, the other people in the country of Rosewind would think of the swamplands as being the redneckish kind of south-ish kind of place. It would definitely be the backwoods or the backwaters of the country, whereas New Wharf would think of itself more like a New York or a Boston. You know what? New Wharf would probably think of itself like a Boston, whereas Damarand would be much more like uh, it's hard to find a good example. Maybe London. It's just a huge melting pot. One of the most international cities in the world, thanks to its rich universities, libraries, and just places of learning. It's a true art student kind of city. Though there's a lot more to it than that, and I hope the players will have fun exploring it, as it's one of the few places I have quite a bit of detail in my notes. Um, yeah, I want to thank everyone for coming by. I hope you had fun with this recap. As always, you can find me here if you have any questions or comments about the setting. As long as it doesn't spoil something extremely relevant to the plot, I have no problem answering questions about the setting or NPCs or other characters they might meet. Yeah, thank you for coming by.